We should also point out polls have closed in some parts of Kentucky, not the entire state, just some parts of it, as they're deciding who will be the next governor of the bluegrass state. Democrat Andy Beshear, elected 4 years ago by roughly 5,000 votes, faces Republican Daniel Cameron, who's the current attorney general and who many see as a rising star in the GOP. CBS News campaign reporter Taurean Small joins us now from Louisville. Taurean, that room has filled up a bit more behind you. Give us a sense of how the two campaigns are feeling and what voters had been telling you here in the closing days of the race.
Yeah, the lights have dimmed low. We started to see a rush of voters start to come in. Andy Beshear's campaign has opened up doors. They're expecting a victory tonight, but also the Daniel Cameron campaign is expecting a victory. Both, though, anticipate this will be a hotly tight, very tight race here, especially considering Beshear won his 2019 bid by just 5,000 votes. But what voters are telling me, especially outside of those precincts that I was at earlier today, they say that they're pretty torn between these two candidates. A lot of voters, Republicans, Democrats, Independents, tell me that both of those candidates, Beshear and Cameron, are good people, in their words. And ultimately, it comes down to the issues. I talked to some Democrats who say the economy is what's keeping them on Team Beshear. One Democrat was a Trump supporter and said that that's part of the reason why she was voting for Cameron this time around. And then Republicans, some culture war issues were really what's driving them to the polls. We saw one man say that his daughter was on his mind, so he liked the fact that Daniel Cameron talked quite a bit about transgender issues, keeping trans athletes out of cisgender sports. So yeah, we're looking at or hearing responses from both sides of the aisle. This is a very tight race. Beshear is looking to lean into his crossover appeal. He was able to win the 2019 election because of his support from Trump voting Republicans. It's to be seen if he's able to keep that momentum in this election.
And Taurean, as you know, Beshear won by about 5,000, only about 5,000 votes 4 years ago. Won his AG race 8 years ago by only about 2,000 votes. So that is a team that is accustomed to and equipped for tight races. So could be a long night there in Louisville. Taurean, thank you for being with us, and we will check in with you again later as CBS News election night coverage continues. And for more on what's happening in Kentucky and other key races tonight, let's bring in Jessica Taylor and Kyle Kondik. Let's just say these guys know what they're talking about, because Jessica is Senate and Governor's editor at the nonpartisan Cook Political Report, and Kyle is managing editor of the nonpartisan Sabatos Crystal Ball at the Center for Politics at the University of Virginia. I am surrounded by UVA grads in this building, Kyle. Yeah, that's all right. Jessica, though, let me start with you and go back to Kentucky for a second, because Andy Beshear's got about a 65% approval rating, a great example of a governor having his own political identity, which is often what these governor's races are about, not national issues so much as statewide issues.
Yeah.
And yet we've seen Republican Daniel Cameron try to paint him as a Biden Democrat.
Right. Comes down to Democrats want to localize. All politics is still local, make this about state issues. People call him Andy when they see him. He's been there in the state. He got high marks for handling the COVID crisis, for natural disasters they had, floods and tornadoes in the state. He showed up to a lot of these rural areas, and you've seen Republicans, at least early on, try to hit him on transgender issues, tying him to Biden. His approval ratings haven't taken a dent. Now, am I surprised that the polls in the final days have tightened? I'm not, because it's fundamentally a Republican state. And if you talk to anyone in the state, they always expected this to be a close race. But governor's races are sort of the last place where voters, I think, look at it as more of a choice on candidates, in effect, apart from sort of the national partisanship of the state. Because there's no prize for, electing the most governors in the country. Whereas if you're voting for Senate, you're voting for who you want to control Congress. But here you have governors. Think of, you had Larry Hogan in Maryland, Charlie Baker in Massachusetts, these sort of unique governors that are able to transcend parties. And with approval ratings like those, we don't typically see a governor lose re-election. A similar one, it was Laura Kelly in Kansas last cycle that also got re-elected. They have very similar profiles. Beshear's name is also very golden in the state. His father was governor, a two-term governor. And so I think it's some of those things that give him an advantage, even in a very red state. But I think both men are really rising stars within the party. They're young. If Beshear wins, I think he's in the mix for 2028, perhaps, looking forward. I don't think he could run for Senate or something like that, and he's tossed that down. But also Daniel Cameron, if he comes close even, he's run a good campaign. If he pulls off sort of what would be an upset, he would be the first Black Republican governor elected in the country. But I think he's also one to watch, win or lose, in Kentucky and beyond.
Because of his ties to Mitch McConnell, among other things. Kyle, down in Mississippi, perhaps the governor's race is not getting as much attention, but part of what's so intriguing is that the Democrat, Mr. Presley, has polled, if not even, certainly closer to Republican Tate Reeves than many thought he could.
Yeah, and look, Mississippi is a very Republican state. It's very racially polarized. You do have a very significant Black electorate there, but the white electorate is bigger, and Republicans have generally dominated at the statewide level in recent years. Presley, I think, probably will keep it relatively close, just like Jim Hood, the former Democratic Attorney General, did 4 years ago when he faced off against Tate Reeves in what was an open seat contest. But boy, it's just so hard to get over the finish line as a Democrat in that state. And so, if you're looking for what would be just sort of really surprising result from tonight, it would definitely be, Democrats winning the Mississippi governorship. There's also the possibility of a runoff in that state, which is a new provision. So it's, there's within the realm of possibility that this one could go to overtime in a few weeks. And
since you are based in Virginia, or at least your entity is, the fact that Glenn Youngkin has thrown himself at these otherwise sleepy legislative races, that's a dynamic we don't normally see a governor try to pull, right?
Well, look, Glenn Youngkin cannot run for a second straight term. Virginia is the only state in the country where a governor cannot run for a second straight term. And I think he really wants to be able to make the most of his last 2 years in office, and he needs a Republican legislature to do that. There are always whispers about Youngkin maybe being a presidential candidate in the future, maybe even this cycle. It'd be a little late to get in now, but you could imagine something like that potentially happening. Obviously, Donald Trump is sort of dominating that race at the moment, at least. Youngkin is, another kind of rising star, I think, in politics. But, we'll see if he actually gets to, do his program for the next 2 years, if he can get both chambers.
Quickly, since both of you guys track this stuff for a living, what's the other sort of obscure or off-the-mark thing that you're tracking tonight or want to see happen?
I think Kyle brought up the runoff. Are we still here? And also, if this governor's race in Kentucky is very close, they actually just changed the state law there as well. If it's less than half a percentage point, which the last race was, then it's an automatic recount. So we could be in sort of limbo in these races. I'm not entirely certain we'll have calls in either tonight based on how close some of these end up being.
Okay. Kyle, how about you?
There's a Pennsylvania state Supreme Court race tonight, and you think, oh, well, state Supreme Court, who cares? But, Pennsylvania is one of the key swing states in the country. Democrats are going to have a majority on that court regardless of what happens, but there have been some closely divided decisions on voting rights and election administration and those sorts of things. And if the Republicans win tonight, they'll have a stronger hand to play in those decisions going forward. So that's another big one in, again, one of the most important states in the country.
Amen to that, and I'm so glad you brought up that one because it's one of those races that you never know. May not matter as much tonight, but could very well matter down the line. Jessica Taylor and Kyle Kondik, great to have you both on a big day.